And today, uh, go back. My name is Darby Payne Alday, and today we're going to be talking about combating diseases in the vegetable garden. And part of this presentation I came up with myself, but I'm a part of a vegetable and fruit work group, and this is one of the presentations that we came up with, but I've made some modifications to it today. So some of the key items that you need to think about whenever you are thinking about diseases and you're planting your plants and to help to keep from having as much disease issues, there's a couple of things that you need to look at or think about. One of them is the soil that you have. You want to have well-drained soil. Plants don't like to have their feet wet. You don't like to have your feet stuck in water, and plants don't either. Another thing that you want is you want sunlight. They need full sun. Majority of plants like that full sun there. They don't like to be shaded. And so you've got to have good sunlight for them. They also need good air movement. They need to be able to get their leaves dry. And so you need to have good airflow within the plants, which means that you don't overcrowd them that much. The next thing is pH. Most plants that we're growing in the garden like a pH of about 6.5, and it can vary a little bit from that, but if you get your pH wrong, then it can start inhibiting the intake of nutrients and things, and so you want to have your pH correct. Water is a big issue in the garden. Sometimes we get diseases because of stresses that come from watering. It could be from overwatering, it could be from underwatering, it could be from having too much water standing on our plant leaves. But water is a big issue that we have to look at when we're looking at diseases. Fertilization. You might not think that fertilization would be an issue there, but it can. Sometimes we can over fertilize and we can cause an abundance of growth there with nitrogen, and we get a lot of leaves, but we get too crowded and we don't get the airflow that we need to go through there. So fertilization can be an issue. Overcrowding, crowding your plants, putting too many in there, and it keeps them from being able to have that airflow that helps to dry off the leaves, that helps to keep them from becoming infected or spreading the infection if we overcrowd them. Weeds can be an issue, and you might think, well, why is that? Well, a lot of times weeds are host for, or they hold on to some of those diseases, and if you don't get rid of the weeds, then they then can transfer it to your plants that you have in there. You also want to look at resistant varieties if they're available, because resistant varieties will do better in the garden against these diseases that they tend to have than ones that are not resistant. Then you also want to kind of have a plan for crop rotation. You don't want to plant the same families in the same area year after year, especially if you have had some disease issues that have gone on in that planting. And so you want to rotate so that you give your soil some time to recover and to get rid of the disease, the spores, or whatever it is that can stay in the ground. And some of them are short-lived, and some of them last for many, many, many years. And it's almost like you can't get rid of it ever. And then sanitation. This is where you want to, at the end of the year or during the season, if you've got issues, sometimes you're going to have to go in there and just take those plants out completely. You're going to pick up all those leaves that have fallen on the ground, or plants that, or your fruit that has fallen on the ground. You're going to pick all that up and take it and get rid of it. You don't want to, most of the time, you don't want to put that stuff into a compost pile to have it go back into your field, because then you just spread the infection more. And our families that we are looking at, whenever I was talking about crop rotation, you have the nightshade families, which has your potatoes and your tomatoes in it, your eggplants. This is your solanaceous crops. Then you have your cucurbits, which are your vine plants, which are like your cucumbers, your squash, your melons. Those all fall within the cucurbit family there. Then you have your cole crops, which are like your greens, your brassicas, your broccoli, your cauliflower, those all, and your greens like your turnip greens, your collards, those all fall under cole crops. Your legumes are your beans, which is like your peas, your field peas, your snap beans, those all fall under your legumes there. Then you've got your goosefoot family, and the goosefoot family is, I just went blank on it. I'll come back to the goosefoot family on that one. Your sunflower family is, it has the sunflowers in it. You have your onion family, which has your chives and your onions. Your carrot family has your carrots, your parsnips, your dill. Cotton family is actually okra. It's in the, it falls within that cotton family. Your grass family is your corn family. And your morning glory family is your sweet potatoes. The goosefoot family is actually like your beets. And I apologize that I went blank on that one for a minute there. So we're going to start off and talk about some of the issues that we see with brassicas. And one of them that we see is black spot, which is of the Alternaria species there. And one of the key things about the Alternaria is that it will start off with like a yellow spot that develops, and it'll enlarge, and it makes concentric rings in there. And if you look at this one, you can see those concentric rings that are forming on this plant here. And sometimes in the very middle of it, you'll see this black mass that can be inside of them. It's kind of a sooty black mass that's within it. And it can drop out. It can cause the center to drop out, so it kind of looks like a shot hole issue. We usually see this on cauliflowers and cabbage. One of the ways, or some of the ways that you can control it, is by rotation of crops. Also, this is a seed-borne disease, so you want to have certified disease-free seeds. And sanitation. So if you have any of this that's going on in your garden, you want to pick up those leaves that are infected, that are growing, or you don't want to leave it in the ground. You want to get rid of that. And then you can also spray it with chlorothalonil or fixed copper. Most of the plants in the garden that we are going to talk about, when it comes to a chemical control, you can use usually about 3 products overall. And then there's more, and we can talk some more about that, but it's usually like chlorothalonil, fixed copper, and mancozeb. Downy mildew. Downy mildew, we see it a lot in our collards or our greens. You'll see the yellow spot underneath the surface of the plant. And then when you look on the back side, it's kind of a whitish downy growth that you'll usually see within that. And the treatment for downy mildew is usually fixed copper. Black rot, yeah, we see this a whole lot in cabbage and in broccoli and cauliflower. This one, it has the yellow to brown V-shaped spots that start on the leaves. So if you look right here, you kind of see that V that's going on. This is also a seed-borne virus or disease, disease. And so you want to get certified seed that doesn't have the disease or certified transplants. You don't want to work in wet fields with this disease, because that just helps to spread it. You want to have a crop rotation that you use, and try to find resistant varieties. Black rot, we see this a lot on cabbage. And so you can see this one up here, that you can see the V's on these that are kind of on the edge, on the margin of the plant there. And then blackleg, I often think of this as being a issue with animals, but plants do have something called blackleg. It can also be called Phoma leaf spot or dry spot. And this one, the leaf spots, they have the fruiting bodies. So if you see in the middle of this one, you see these black fruiting bodies that are coming out of those spots. You'll also see stem darkening and cankers on the stem there. And you want to use clean seed, which means that you get certified disease-free seeds on that. On the stem darkening and the cankers, you'll see it'll start out as like a brown spot on there, and then it'll start to have like a black to a purplish border, and it'll sink in, and that's an indication that it is blackleg. Club root is actually caused by a slime mold. It's a soil-borne slime mold, and it can survive many, many years in the soil. The roots actually become malformed, and they're swollen, and they form galls that are on there, and those galls make it difficult to take up water, and it causes wilting and eventual death of the plant. The control for this is to plant your brassicas in well-drained soil and in a pH above 7.0. So the 7.0 is kind of inhibitor for the slime mold. We're going to move on to beans now. So in our beans, one of the major diseases that we see is anthracnose. And anthracnose, you'll see the dark sunken spots on the pods and on the stems. So you see these dark spots, and you can kind of tell where they've sunken in there. Control for this is to use chlorothalonil or fixed copper. You want to avoid, if possible, overhead sprinkler irrigation. You want to use crop rotation and look for resistant varieties. Beans are also known to get bacterial blights or halo blights, and they're called halo blights because they get this kind of yellow halo that goes on there. But they start out with brown irregular spots. So there's you know, you got this big one, then you got these little ones that are on there. And they can also, these spots can also transfer to the pods on there. And it could have that yellow halo on there. The control for this is fixed copper. You want to use disease-free seeds, and crop rotation is very important so that you don't continually have infection of your beans there. And you don't want to work in the beans whenever the soil is wet, and you want to look for resistant varieties. Rust. It's reddish brown, which is kind of the color of rust, but it's reddish brown pustules that are on the leaves and the pods. And you control these using chlorothalonil and sulfur, and look for resistant varieties. Beans can get viruses, and usually whenever they get one of the viruses, the leaves will turn yellow. They can be crinkled. They can be speckled looking. The leaves can cup on there. You can kind of see that one is kind of starting to cut. And the runners are often killed. And we see this a whole lot in half runner beans. So in your snap beans in the half runners, they're very susceptible to this, especially the pink half runners. So one of the ways that you can kind of combat this or control it is to do successive plantings of it, so that you'll have new plantings coming, or new plants coming in after the first group kind of starts to get this virus, if that's the type of one that you want to use. And then you want to maybe look at resistant bush varieties instead of the half runner variety. And
Hey,
oftentimes, yes.
They need to look at another location. Look like there's an awful lot of rock in that field that beans is growing in. Did you notice that?
I didn't, but yes, you're right on that. But I think that was just to get a picture of it, and this came from Colorado State. The picture of that one did. So, you know, but you're right. You know, again, it goes back to site. You know, being well drained in places that you want it to be at, and you know, if you've got a lot of rock like that right there, you may want to look at doing raised beds on a lot of this stuff. And I put Mexican bean beetle in there, and it's not because that they are a disease, but if you look at the leaves there, a lot of times people will see this and they do something that's called like window painting. You know, they go in there and they suck out the juice within the leaf there, and so then it dies. That cell dies, and as it dies, it kind of window panes, and then you know you start getting holes in it, and a lot of people think that this is actually a disease, but it's not. We're going to move on to cucurbits here. One of the big things that they get is anthracnose, and this one, you get the leaf spots and they tend to drop out. So you look at this and you've got that spot, and then in the very middle of it, it's dropped out. If you see it on the plant, on the fruit itself, it's going to be sunken spots on it. One of the ways that you control it is to use chlorothalonil or mancozeb. You also want to look for disease-free seeds. You want to use crop rotations, overhead watering You want to avoid it because it tends to keep water on the leaves, and that helps to spread the disease. So you want them to be drier if possible. And you want to look for resistant varieties whenever you're looking at your cucurbits. Downy mildew. This one you'll kind of see the yellowing of the leaves there, and on the underside of it, instead of like being a downy color, it's actually kind of a gray mold that's underneath it. And you want to control this using chlorothalonil, mancozeb. You want disease-free seeds. And I'm going to say that probably quite often, because a lot of these diseases are seed-borne. You want to do a good crop rotation. Again, avoid overhead watering, just so that your leaves don't stay wet all the time. And you want to look for resistant varieties on that. And one that is often confused with downy mildew is powdery mildew. And so this plant actually has both of them on the plant together. And so on this one, you've got the downy mildew, which you can see it's the yellow, but it's on the underside of it. And powdery mildew is the white looking powder that's on the top, or it looks like white powder on the top of the leaf. And you can have both of them at the same time on the same plant. So for powdery mildew, you're going to have that white powdery mold that's going to be on the stems and on the leaves of the plant. And you can control it using sulfur and chlorothalonil. However, if you use sulfur, you can burn both your cucumbers and your cantaloupes if you spray it when the temps are above about 90 degrees outside. So you want to be careful whenever you're spraying them if you're using sulfur. And you also want to look for resistant varieties on powdery mildew. Another one that cucurbits tend to see is angular leaf spot. This one you have brown angular spots on the leaves. So if you look at them, they're not rounded spots, they're angular. A lot of times the middle will fall out of them. And you want to control these with using fixed copper and look for resistant varieties. Bacterial wilt. It kind of comes on suddenly, and your plant it's growing great one day, and then the next day you go out there and it has wilted and it's died. And it's usually on individual runners. A lot of times whenever you look at it, it's like one part of it has died. And this is actually caused by the cucumber beetle that has a bacterium that it deposits into the plant and causes it to wilt. So the way to control this is actually by controlling the insect, the cucumber beetle, and not applying a fungicide of any kind. Cucurbits can also get viruses. One of the most common ones that we see is the cucumber mosaic virus. And most of the time, cucumbers are a solid green or a pretty solid green. Sometimes when they get older, you might see some of this white right here. But as you look at these are kind of mottled in coloring. They're kind of yellowish green with a mosaic kind of pattern. They're kind of splotchy. These are actually spread by aphids, this disease is, and it can be spread mechanically. So humans can be part of the cause for this virus to spread, because we go in there, and if we don't clean our tools in between touching an infected plant and an uninfected plant, then we can spread it. So the control for this is really using resistant cultivars and timing of the planting so that you can avoid aphids, so that you're not planting them when you're going to have a huge aphid infestation will also help. Moving on to our nightshade plants, our tomatoes, peppers, and tomatoes. Bacterial leaf spot. On bacterial leaf spots, the initial spots will kind of look like it's just a water-soaked area on there. They can be black, brown, or tan. And you can see it on the underside of the leaf. And when you see it on the fruit, you will see some dark gray spots on the fruit. So here you can see it on the fruit. And to control it, we would like to use fixed copper mixed with mancozeb. There are some plants that have resistance to them, but not all. And it's difficult to control during wet weather just because of the way that it transfers through water. And so if it splashes, it can transfer that away. So you don't want to work them if you can help it when they're wet. This is actually a seed-borne pathogen, and you want to try to avoid overhead watering. So with the seed-borne pathogen, you want to try to get certified seeds that are disease-free. Phytophthora blight. This is one that causes rapid wilting in the plant of the death of the plant, with dark shriveled area around the soil. So if you look right here, you can tell how it's kind of shriveled up, and you may see this white part on it there. And we usually see these occur after wet, warm periods. So if we've had a lot of rain and it's middle of the summer, you may see a lot of Phytophthora blight. The control for the Phytophthora blight is using resistant varieties. One of the other thing is, because Phytophthora stays so long in the soil, that you may want to use a raised bed and have soil in there that has good drainage in it. If you're putting them into the soil, then you want to make sure that you improve your drainage if you have a drainage issue. And you never want to plant tomatoes or any of the nightshades in wet areas, because they do not do very well with their feet staying wet. Septoria. Septoria leaf spot there is small, dark leaf spots that may develop kind of some of the lighter color centers on them. It usually starts out on the lower leaves, and they'll yellow and drop. It can affect the leaves and the stems of them. Usually early to the mid-season during wet weather is when we see a lot of Septoria leaf spot on that. If it's heavily infested on that plant, it can defoliate it. The inoculum that is Septoria, it's windblown through water splash and through people. So, you don't want to work your tomatoes during a wet period or while they're still wet if they have Septoria, because you can transfer it pretty easily. Control for this, it can be chlorothalonil and mancozeb. It's been stated that you can stake the plants and remove the lower suckers on it, and that will help to remove the inoculum from around there so it's not splashing up on there. You want to destroy any infected plant materials. You don't want to put it in any composting there. You want to use the rotation of crops. You want to use resistant varieties. And this is one where mulching doesn't help to reduce it a whole lot because it is spread through like water splashing. So if it falls on the mulch and the water splashes on it and it splashes back up to the lower leaves, it's still going to infect it. So it's not going to be a lot of help using the mulch there. Another one that we see is early blight. And over here on this one, it probably shows it just a little bit better, but it starts out with like these brown spots and it does like concentric rings that you'll see on there. It's called a bullseye. That's part of one of the things that identifies this as early blight. And this can be on the stems. It can also be on the leaves. If you see it on the fruit, it's on the fruit near the stem, not on the bottom of the plant. It is spread through wind and through water splashing. So this one also, the lower leaves will become infected first usually, and they'll yellow and drop. And so this happens early to mid-season usually in very wet weather. The control for this is usually mancozeb and chlorothalonil. You want to remove any crop debris that is infected and get rid of it. And you want to use crop rotation to help combat early blight. And this is one of the most common ones that we see in tomatoes. And here's another one. You can get the halo kind of effect from this one. And actually on that one, you have both septoria, leaf spot, and early blight. So a lot of times you can have two diseases going on at the same time. And here is what it will kind of look like whenever you're seeing it. And this is where you see it on your plants. You got kind of those concentric rings that kind of come up on your plants, but they come up starting up here where your stem is at on your plant. Southern blight. This is one that we're talking about it in tomatoes. We see it a lot in tomatoes, but it has a huge host of plants that it will affect. On this one, your plant, you'll see a white stem. It'll wilt and die, pretty quickly. It is worse in hot, dry years. And you can see the little seeds that are right there on that one. And here's a better one that you can, looks like little seeds, looks like little mustard seeds, but this is actually the spores that are distributed. And what you want to do to control this is you want to remove the plant entirely. And you actually want to get down into the soil and actually remove the soil like 6 inches out or further and at least 6 inches deep so that you get rid of all of that, because it does have so many hosts that it can infect. You can deep plow to bury the inoculum. These seeds, you don't want any of your plants to be able to come in contact with these so that it can start over again. Fusarium wilt. You see a yellowing and a dying of the foliage. It's brown discoloration on the inside of the stem. So here we see the brown discoloration. If you take that stem and you slice it, you'll see that because it's killing the feeding vessels of the plant there. But for fusarium and for verticulum, you want to make sure that you get a positive ID so that you know that that's what there is, because there's no cure for this. There's no control for it. And you want to make sure that you get a positive ID. So this is one where you would probably want to bring it in and have us send it to the diagnostics lab so that we could get a positive ID for you on that. The only control for this is to use resistant varieties and to use a good crop rotation on this. Verticulum, wilt is very similar in what it does as far as the fusarium, but one of its key identifiers is that it will have like this V-shaped lesion on the leaf margin that you see right there. And it can have the halo effect going on. You can have brown, I thought I had it in there, but you can have brown discoloration also inside the stem. It looks a little different than the fusarium, but because they're very similar to some other diseases, you want to make sure that you get a positive ID, because again, this is one that there is no control for it. So the only thing that you can really do is use resistant varieties and good crop rotation. The next one that we're going to talk about is tomato spotted wilt virus. This one you'll kind of see a purplish or a bronze discoloration of young leaves that are on there. And this is spread by thrips. And a lot of times we see them coming out of the garden centers or out of the greenhouses with the thrips on there. And the thrips are the vectors of this disease here. And so you want to control it by controlling your thrips with an insecticide such as a spinosad. And there are very few resistant varieties out there that are resistant to tomato spotted wilt virus. So you just want to make sure that you get a good healthy plant and that you're not bringing in any vectors to your garden. Potato scab. This is where when you look at your potatoes, they're going to be rough, scaly spots on the tubers. That's where you see them. So these kind of scaly spots, those are potato scab. And you want to control it using scab-free seed pieces. So again, it's clean seeds that you're using it. And if you've had it occur, then you want to make sure that you use resistant varieties and definitely use crop rotation. Moving on to sweet corn. In sweet corn, a lot of times we will see rust, which is kind of the bronze spore spots that are on there. And these spores will rub off on your hands if you take your hands and rub across them. Control for these would be using chlorothalonil and mancozeb. And the thing about corn is a lot of times they can be used to help to block a lot of diseases that are coming in through insects. So sometimes they can be I guess, kind of a sacrificial crop for some things. Stewart's wilt or bacterial leaf blight. The blights, you'll see elongated spots in the drying of the leaves. And on this one, you kind of see the streaking through it. The control for this is chlorothalonil and mancozeb. Smut. This is, it's actually a gall that occurs on the ears and the tassels and the nodes. And when they mature, they will end up with a dark, powdery spore that's in there. A lot of times we'll see these in silver queen. For a lot of people, that like Mexican food, this is actually a delicacy in Mexico. So to control this, there are only a few partial resistant varieties. Smut, it has been known to occur more in Silver Queen, so that may be a variety that you may want to think about if you're worried about smut. You want to control corn borers, which can help to vector it along. Try to do not do mechanical damage to your plants. And you don't want to give too much nitrogen to your corn there, because that tends to help to promote the smut that goes on. And if at all possible, you want to remove the galls before they erupt. And then after the season, you want to make sure that you practice good sanitation and you remove all vegetation from the area, especially if you have had issues with smut. And we're going to move into other issues that are often confused for diseases. You know, people will come in and they'll be like, what has caused this? And they're not actually diseases, but they're confused for them. So we have blossom end rot, and these will start out as water-soaked areas of dead tissue at the bottom of the fruit, which is at the blossom, where the blossom attached to it, and it developed from there. And this area will dry and it'll turn black, and it's often invaded by a secondary infection. So it kind of starts off here, and then you'll start seeing like this white mold in there. That's a secondary infection. And this is actually caused by a couple of things. It's a calcium deficiency, but that doesn't mean that your soil necessarily has a calcium deficiency, but you may have had too much rain, or you may have too much or not enough rain, so that your plant can't take up the calcium, because your tomatoes take up calcium through the water. And so it's a calcium issue within the plant, but it may not be because of a lack of calcium, but for some reason it's being inhibited from being taken up. High nitrogen fertilization can also be a factor in this, as well as soil pH can also affect it, as to how much it will be able to take it up. So one of the things that you can do to prevent blossom end rot is to try to maintain your moisture level within your tomatoes there, or your nightshade plants. And you can use, drip irrigation is a great way to use that, or you can use mulch to help to keep the soil moist. Test your soil, see what your pH is, make sure that it's where it needs to be, not too high, not too low. And then you want to fertilize according to the recommendations that you get from your soil test, and you don't want to overdo it with the nitrogen. You can add, a lot of times during the year or the season, you'll add nitrogen with it, but you can add some calcium nitrate to go along with it. You can spray some calcium on there. You want to pull affected plants so that so if you see it coming on, then what you want to do, you want to pull those plants or those fruit off, so that your tomatoes will go ahead and put more structure into your we'll put more energy into the fruit that is being grown at that time. It can happen in peppers, and this is what you'll kind of see on your peppers there. And it can happen on melons. You'll see it on there. It's can be poor pollination also in melons. Cracking. This often happens whenever there is a fluctuation in moisture uptake into your plants. You want to try to make sure that you keep a steady moisture level, and that will help to keep them from cracking. We often see cat facing, which is caused by poor conditions during blossoming, which leads to poor pollination. And this can be caused by low temperatures when you put your plant out in the early season before the flowers mature. So, you know, tomatoes are a warm season plant. They don't like cold temperatures. So if you put them out too early, they won't do very well. It can also be injury from 2,4-D, and can be pruning and high nitrogen can make the issue worse. You can also have yellow shouldering on this, and yellow shouldering can be a whole variety of things. It could be delayed ripening on there. It can be triggered by high pH, high magnesium or low potassium, as well as high temperatures. It can be a challenge to address for gardeners because there can be so many different issues. But the best thing to control it, or the best options for control, is proper pH and nutrient management on those. We also often see sun scald, which is where the tissue is killed by high heat. And this is often due because the canopy of the plant is not it's not enough to cover the fruit to protect it. And it's just like us, if we go out into the sun and we don't protect ourselves, then we tend to get sunburned. And that's basically what sun scald is that it gets like a burn right there, and it's usually on one side that is facing the sun that gets hit right there. So if you have a plant that gets a lot of leaf diseases, or if it's starting to lose its leaves because of a disease, then you can also see sun scald that will go along with it. And you'll see the sunken space on this side of it that causes the issue. We also often see leaf distortions that come in, and people will come in and they'll say, my plant just doesn't look right. And a lot of times this is due to herbicide damage. It's due from drift. And they may be like, well, I didn't spray anything. Well, they may not have sprayed anything, but a neighbor may have. And so you'll see kind of these distorted leaves, and sometimes they'll kind of bubble up. They'll look kind of just funky there. And you can also see leaf bleaching, which is an indicator that it's an herbicide damage that's there. Sometimes they will grow out of this, and sometimes you just need to pull the plant. Bronzing on leaves. Sometimes we'll see bronzing, And you'll think, oh, well, you know, because they're turning colors, it's got to be a disease. Well, actually, sometimes it's an insect issue again, like we looked at the Mexican bean beetle. This one is a spider mite feeding that has caused the damage. It's caused the bronzing of those leaves. And then we have what they call waterlogging. So you go out to the garden and all of a sudden your plant is just wilted over. It has no other symptoms to it. It doesn't have spots on the leaves. It doesn't have yellowing on the leaves. There's no other real issues that you can tell that's going on. It happens very quickly, usually. Then it could be that you have waterlogged soil. Your plant roots, they have to have oxygen. And although they can breathe a little bit in water, too much water, they don't get enough oxygen to them. So if your soil is not well drained and you have a lot of moisture that comes in, you can have waterlogging that occurs in your plant there. So in this case, site selection is a huge issue that you want to make sure that you put them in the right place. But, you know, if we have a week of rain and, you know, we get 10 inches of rain, there's not a lot that you can do for that in any soil. And so it may just be something that you have to deal with. But if you can help it out, then that's what you can do to help keep from waterlogging your plants. Some of the resources that I used today was I went to the uthort.com site. That's where all of our horticultural information is housed at. I also use the publication Home Vegetable Garden Disease Control, number W316, to help you to identify what may be going on with your plants. One of the recommended sites is from Cornell. It's this Vegetable MD online. And it's a great one that will help you to identify what maybe you have going on. We have a publication, Tomato Wilt Problem, SP370C, that I used. And then we also have one that is really great, especially if you're wanting to go organic or you're wanting to see what other options you have. The options that I gave you were just kind of conventional ones today, but you can go to the conventional and organic product overview publication that we have, which is W661, and it will tell you what all it will control on that. And so that is all that I have for you to see on that. So I think we have a poll that is going on right now. So I'll let y'all do the poll, and then I will take any questions if there's any questions.
I don't see any in the chat, Darby, but I do have a question for you.
Okay.
Just a question I had from a gardener the other day about being able to put anything on seeds that they have kept back from one year to the next, as far as fungicides or anything of that nature. You got any experience with any of the seed coatings?
There is one that is recommended. I don't have any dealings with it, doing that myself, but they can do a seed coating. They can also do like a heat sterilization of them to help um, to take care of that stuff. And actually, I think that is covered in that W316 publication on that, Matt. But I personally don't have the experience with it. One of the other agents that's on may have some info on that. All right. Any other questions?
I think
Good
that's
job,
it.
Darby. That was good.
All right. Well, thank y'all for being on here and listening to me.
Hey, Matt, while we got mostly our team